Welcome to Speaking Concretely, the official podcast of the Cement Association of Canada. I'm your host, Adam Auer, President and CEO of the Cement Association of Canada. On today's podcast, we're talking about innovation, and more specifically, what innovation in cement and concrete looks like, past, present, and future. Like any industry, we need to innovate and adapt to an ever-changing world. From affordability to climate change to digitization and artificial intelligence, the pace of change is always accelerating and becoming more complex. On today's episode, I'm sitting down with Shane Mulligan of Heidelberg Materials to talk about the important innovations and research being done to adapt to the challenges our industry and country faces. Shane is a civil engineer with 20 years experience in cement and concrete and currently leads Heidelberg's technical and sustainability marketing program in Canada. Welcome, Shane, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Shane, your company has been active in North America since the late 1800s, and you don't stay in business this long without having to go through at least a few rounds of innovation and change. And yet there is this kind of common perception in the market that concrete is not that sophisticated material, a fairly basic material. One of my board members, CEO of one of the large producers here in Canada, said that many of his clients still refer to concrete as mud that gets hard. And yet, actually, the chemistry is quite sophisticated to produce cement and concrete. It has changed significantly over the past 100 plus years. What can you tell us about the role that innovation has played in the history of the cement and concrete industry? And what are some of the major innovations that have happened in the past that have had, the largest impact on the industry as it exists today?
Sure. So I think concrete can be very dull and gray. And I think because it's ubiquitous and everywhere around us that people kind of get used to seeing it there and can't imagine it changing all that much over time. Most of the innovations that concrete has brought over the past decades are not really visible. Low carbon concrete is virtually indistinguishable from traditional concrete in terms of appearance. And so it's really tough to get people excited about the benefits of that change as a result. But the industry has got a lot more sophisticated over the last several decades. The inputs of cement are not a constant stream of homogeneous material. It's the same basic ingredients that are going into the formulations, but the technology that's going into analyzing them, constant stream of monitoring of the chemistry, the heat, the equipment condition, all these things are necessary to keep the industrial operations going. And then on the concrete side, we've really moved from things like 6-bag concrete mixes to very much precise formulations with, chemical admixtures playing a much more important role. In terms of the innovations that are now coming on board, we run quite the gamut across the value chain. From how cement is made, where we've got all sorts of new technologies with blended cements. We're looking at carbon capture and storage technologies worldwide. We're looking at how concrete is installed in terms of 3D printing operations, how concrete is transported to the site using electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles that are quarry operations. And then even in terms of the data that's being generated, we have all sorts of new technologies that are digital, that look at sensor type technologies in our trucks that measure the different performance qualities of the concrete as it's being delivered, maturity monitors as we're looking at the strength gain of the concrete as it cures in place. And then a layer on top of that from the reporting perspective in terms of environmental product declarations, moving towards product passports, looking at blockchain technology. There's no end to the different technologies and innovations that are happening in the industry presently.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that question about what the sort of contemporary innovation pressure points are, because it seems to me, certainly from the perspective of the association, that there are innovation pressures around social challenges like housing affordability, and climate change and sustainability. But of course, there are also competitive market forces at work that are pushing in industries to look at modernization of processes and practices through digitization and AI, et cetera. Maybe you can sort of ground that in the context of your specific company. What are some of the new innovations and research that Heidelberg is working on that you can share with us?
Yeah, as you say, there's lots of different pressure points that are affecting our day-to-day business and kind of driving where we're putting our efforts around innovation and sustainability. We have project schedules, the cost of doing business, the cost of raw materials, finding skilled labor, looking at code adoption and getting our products into actual application in the various industries or market sectors that we work in, looking at safety, reducing carbon footprint, addressing circularity and recycled materials, addressing the growing impacts of climate change and trying to adapt with more resilient building structures and infrastructure. There's really no shortage when it comes to the pressures that we're trying to address with the different technologies and innovations that we're coming out with.
I mean, one of the technologies that I'm fascinated by, mostly because I really have very limited understanding of it, is artificial intelligence. But we're starting to hear a lot more about the role of artificial intelligence in the cement and concrete industry. In fact, just the other day, there was a funding announcement for a company that deploys AI as sort of a mix optimization tool for concrete producers. It sort of seems to be everywhere these days. Can you tell us a little bit about work that you might be doing on the artificial intelligence space?
Yeah, I think AI is a very exciting technology, and to me, it really focuses on consuming mass amounts of data. Every occurrence or action along the value chain in construction generates an explosion of data, and in some cases, it's worth measuring and recording and analyzing. Whether it's the environmental impact, cost, impact on schedule, performance, or different various aspects of quality, there are all sorts of different interrelated attributes that come along with our products. And sometimes if you're seeking improvement in one area, there are trade-offs in another area. And when you have a project that involves, tens of mixes and thousands of individual loads of delivery with concrete, that data becomes very cumbersome because there's just so much of it. And AI can be a very powerful tool in this space because it consumes all this information and really synthesize it into an easy to interpret way with dashboards and different reporting that allows for a lot easier decision-making, which possibly can replace different elements of that process as well. One example we have is working with our partners in the use of AI to optimize concrete mix designs through our partners at Geotech and their smart mix system. The program has really learned from analyzing thousands of mixes across our systems, looking at our mix designs and testing and quality data, and then identifying where there might be overperformance or over-designing with our materials. It can then generate, a number of different optimization scenarios that our quality control personnel can review and select depending on what the objective might be, whether it's cost optimization, carbon optimization, or what have you. And when you combine that mix optimization process with these sensor technologies that we have in our concrete trucks that measure the properties of the concrete in its plastic state, or the maturity monitoring sensors that we have with the concrete it's curing in place, there's some very powerful efficiencies that can be unlocked as part of this feedback loop that gets created. And it really creates some very real-time decision-making that will have a very tremendously positive impact on the projects that we're ultimately supplying.
One of the concerns you always hear about AI, sort of relating to this efficiency piece, is that that efficiency is going to ultimately reduce the number of jobs that are required to run not just manufacturing processes in our industry, but of course across all sorts of industries. Is that something that you guys are concerned about?
Well, I'm probably the first person to come onto a podcast and warn about the dangers of AI. There's no shortage of great films and literature out there that highlights the pitfalls of this technology. And AI to me kind of always calls to mind the novel Player Piano by Kurt Vonnegut, where almost everyone's job in the world has been replaced by automation and mechanization, leaving only really managers and engineers, which is about as dystopian as you can get. And while some tout these achievements as being a great success for mankind, making life easier for everyone, it also leaves people without a job and feeling purposeless and kind of dehumanized. And, certainly the fear of technology taking over jobs has been there for some time, but, ignoring these advancements doesn't necessarily make them go away. The reality is that this technology exists, it's expanding, and there's a need to adapt. And I really think it's important to treat AI as a tool as opposed to an opponent or some sort of competing force. That smart mix example I cited is a good example of how AI does a lot of analysis that would take a lot of time generally, but it does it instantly. But it produces a result that still needs existing QC personnel to review and make a decision on. Another good example is the autonomous vehicles that we're piloting in our Texas quarry operations. These trucks operate without a driver and allow the truck to function somewhat differently as a result. Maybe move a little faster, repeatedly maximize payloads and reduce the number of trips, reduce idling or the wear and tear on the vehicle that a regular user might impose upon it. And there's benefits to that on the human side as well, is that, quarries can be very large, very active sites. Sometimes the blasting and quarrying is taking place very far distances from where the processing areas are, or where the crushing activities might take place, or the stockpiles or the scales. And by removing humans from that system, you're ensuring they're not in harm's way. They're away from those heavy vehicles. They're away from this constant movement and dangers that might exist as a result. So not only does it allow for some efficiencies gain, it also improves the safety. And while that also might reduce some of the drivers that might ordinarily be required on the site to do the job, it's not necessarily removing the total job, because there's still a supervision component that's required. And, to be honest, at the end of the day, these types of jobs, driving a truck on a quarry, are not in high demand and are generally very difficult for us to staff. So it's serving a purpose there as well.
Well, actually, that's a much more sort of positive message than I used to hearing about these of AI type technology. So that's super fascinating to hear. I want to turn just briefly to sustainability. I know you've already mentioned it in some of your comments, but of course, it's a theme that's run through our podcasts, largely because it is one of the major priorities of our sector. In particular, the challenge of decarbonization and climate resilience. Can you talk a little bit about where, what the innovation story looks like on the sustainability front? Like, what do you see as some of the technological innovations that can help in our objective to improve not only our carbon footprint, but our broader sustainability practices?
Yeah, I think almost all of our innovations, that whether they're on the digital side, the technical side, the product side, they're all driving sustainability. That is the main driver as to why we're pursuing a lot of these different avenues that are out there. One of the big ones for us is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. We as a company are targeting 10 megatons of carbon capture by 2030 cumulatively, with various plants that we've identified across the globe. I could certainly unpack that a little bit as we go, but another key focus of sustainability for us is on another pillar of our sustainability journey, which is being circular and resilient, and investing in the circular economy and demonstrating extended producer responsibility. And one of the innovation I'm really excited about here is one that we're calling recycled concrete paste, where we're looking at the returned concrete that's coming back to our facilities and processing it in a very purposeful way, such that we're separating larger aggregate from our smaller aggregate. And then as a result of this recycling process, we end up with all this fine material as well, which is the sand and some of the cementitious material that comes out of that recycling process. We're able to take that product and recycle it and either incorporate it into new concrete as a filler as part of the cement production process, or we're able to expose it to enforced carbonation and create an SCM product that can reduce the amount of cement that's ultimately required in a concrete mix. So we're really going full circle with this technology, where we're taking that returned concrete and turning it into new concrete at its very most fundamental level, replacing the cement.
I love the circularity notion, and actually it reminds me that we need to do a podcast focused on circularity in the cement and concrete industry, because I think people would be quite surprised to understand how much integration of waste materials from outside of our own production value chain we're able to integrate into the process, and increasingly some of the innovations that, like you just mentioned, about taking our own waste products and integrating them back into the production system. I think that's like such an amazing story that we need to tell a little bit louder than we are. But I feel like I need to ask you about CCUS, because of course Heidelberg's Edmonton facility is really on the cusp of the conversation about the evolution of carbon capture, utilization, and storage technology in our industry. Is there what can you tell us about that project in Edmonton, and how much of the sort of innovation agenda is being driven by that particular class of technologies?
Yeah, the CCUS project in Edmonton is very exciting. It's been top of mind at almost every meeting and conversation that we're having with external audience groups. Everyone's very excited about this notion of net zero concrete by 2050, and to hear that it's possible within the next 5 years or so with this project in Western Canada is very exciting to not only those in Heidelberg, but those in the broader industry. And it's certainly no small feat. We have a huge dedicated team that's focused on driving this project forward. There's lots of complex elements to it, from the chemistry that we're looking at with our amine technology, with how the actual carbon is going to be treated, to the construction of the site itself and how that's going to work, and working with our partners about how we're going to transport that carbon away from the facility and then ultimately store it underground, and how safe and permanent is that going to be, and how do we prove that out and demonstrate to the industry that we're ultimately permanently sequestering this carbon and making that positive net zero impact that we want to see with this product. It's truly fascinating to watch, and a lot of it's certainly above my head in terms of the technical details that go into it. But I think we have the right team in place, and there's a lot of knowledge that's been transferred across our organization with the work that we're doing in Brevik and some of the other sites that we've got on the go. So I have no doubt that it's going to be a very successful project when it's finally completed.
It's fantastic, and we're all across the industry, as you say, we're all very excited about the potential of that project to show what a viable path to net zero looks like for our sector. Of course, CCUS is one of a whole menu of approaches that we're adopting, not just on the sustainability side, but the whole list of sort of innovation initiatives that you've mentioned over the past few questions here. And one of the challenges that I know we face as an industry in the innovation space, be it the introduction of lower carbon cements and concretes or other innovations, is that sometimes the barrier is not just the discovery and R&D and sort of iterative process of bringing innovations into the commercial space, but also how you translate those innovations into the market. And it's a market that is inherently conservative and risk adverse. There's as I've said before on this podcast, change in the construction industry is often perceived simply as risk. Can you tell us a little bit about the challenges of how you move from R&D through the innovation process into commercial operation, and how you help innovation find its place in practice in the market?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. That I think the biggest challenge that we have here with the majority of our innovations, especially on the product side, whether it's low carbon or recycled content or new admixtures or cement blends, whatever the case might be, it's around adoption and ensuring the end users and specifiers are confident in the performance that we're ultimately going to achieve with these new materials and solutions that we might be offering. We often encounter specifications that are problematic for whatever reason. They don't allow the flexibility we're looking for. They're using old ways of doing things that aren't necessarily current with the modern best practices or whatever the case might be. And oftentimes there are gatekeepers of these specifications who are unwilling to consider change for any number of reasons. And it's not that the specification can't be modified, it's that there's a performance expectation for a given application that needs to be met. And in order for that to happen, there needs to be, a trust that that's going to be the case. And, you probably remember the television show from the 90s, X-Files, that had, trust no one as one of their main taglines. And that seems to be a very deep-rooted philosophy in the construction industry. And, I think there's good reason for that in a lot of ways. Like, there's a lot of liability associated with construction, and due diligence is really a core tenet of good engineering practice. But there's a wariness about change that's very difficult to navigate as a product supplier. There's a lack of trust when it comes to these different solutions that we're offering. And I think one of the ways that we can help address that is with some of these digital solutions that we're offering that can help rebuild that trust. They provide the data and the hard proof points about the performance of the different aspects of quality that might be under investigation for concrete or cement. It still takes time, and I think the industry could probably do a much better job kind of communicating the success of these common industry level innovations and sharing practice or best practices across different jurisdictions, so that we're not starting from scratch in every city or every customer at a time. Every city that we're in with these new solutions, or every province, every state wants to do their own pilot projects to make sure that it's going to work within their specific climate, within their specific application. And we're often reinventing the wheel, where if there was better information sharing Canada-wide, North American-wide, we'd have a much better data set and foundation to make decisions from. And I think that is an area of innovation that we could probably improve upon as an industry today.
Well, Shane, you've given us a great overview of the innovation landscape in the cement and concrete sector, and a lot of great ideas are kind of percolating in my heads about how we can do, a deeper dive on some of these in future podcast episodes. But I wanted to sort of circle back to the first question and maybe ask, given what you've shared with us today, what would you say to those folks out there who still sort of see the cement and concrete industry as old school or behind the time or not particularly innovative? And maybe tacking on to that, what are you most excited for in terms of innovation in our sector? What specifically, either at Heidelberg or from the perspective of the industry as a whole, is kind of driving your excitement about what the future looks like for our sector?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece of advice to those that still look at concrete as being behind the times would be to look closer. You're not going to be able to see it when you do see the new sidewalks or new foundations of a building being poured, but that the technology is there and it's inherent in the products that we're delivering. Yesterday's concrete might be made of the same raw materials, might share the same DNA with the new concrete that's going out the door, but the amount of technology that's there supporting it, making sure it's going to function properly, make sure it's low carbon, make sure it's cost effective, reducing the amount of skilled labor that's required to place that product. There's innovations happening every day, and they keep coming. Concrete is famously long-lasting and durable. I don't think anybody challenges that, but I think the knock is constantly against it, that it's high in carbon, and that's probably the aspect of concrete that's most rapidly changing with different technologies that we have today: blended cements, more sophisticated mix optimization, alternative fuels at our cement plants. Again, none of these things are visible in the final product, but they're constantly and rapidly driving down the carbon intensity of the product. And, to answer the second part of the question in terms of what I'm most excited about to see next, it is net zero concrete. We have the promise of carbon capture. I want to see it delivered here in North America, and it's not too far away. And once that's there, we have the proof point to the industry that it's possible. And from there, we can keep going. I think there's a future where concrete can become a carbon sink, looking at all these new carbon utilization technologies that are out there. There's a lot of them out there today. There's only going to be more as we head towards these 2030, 2050 time horizons. And there's nothing but opportunity for concrete to continue to play in this space.
I think that's a fantastic message. As you say, for the end consumer, the product is not necessarily going to look very different. It's not like we see in other kind of consumer products where you see an evolution of what the product looks like in your hands. You think about the early cell phones to the iPhones that we have today, or the transition from internal combustion cars to electric cars. There's a big transformation that consumers can see and feel in the product. You're not necessarily going to get that in cement and concrete, even though if you look under the hood, there's a whole world of really amazing innovations taking place. Thank you so much, Shane, for speaking with us today. And like you, I'm very excited about many of the innovations that are being introduced in our sector. And I hope that as an industry, we can do a great job of communicating those innovations to the broader marketplace. So thank you. Thank you very much again, Shane.
Thank you.
Thank you to our audience for listening. And don't forget to subscribe and follow our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. We hope to see you next time.